Jake Morrison stood in the great hall of the Galactic Council and felt his anger grow with each passing minute. The alien delegates sat in their floating chairs and spoke about human lives like they were talking about broken tools. For 30 years, humanity had served the Council without question. They had done every dirty job, fought every war, and died in every conflict that the other species were too proud or too scared to handle themselves. The latest request made Jake's blood boil. The Zephyrian Empire and the Crystalline Collective had started fighting again over some old border dispute that went back hundreds of years. Both sides had weapons that could destroy entire planets, and they were pointing them at each other like children with loaded guns. The Council wanted human peacekeepers to stand between them and stop the shooting. Admiral Lisa Carter had already sent 2 full fleets to try and keep the peace. More than 10,000 human soldiers and spacers had died trying to stop aliens from killing each other over rocks and empty space. The Zephyrians shot at anything that moved, and the Crystallines used weapons that turned living beings into glass statues. Human ships floated dead in space between the 2 battle lines, their crews frozen forever in crystal coffins or burned to ash by energy weapons. Jake remembered every report that crossed his desk. Captain Betty Walsh and her entire crew vaporized when they tried to escort a refugee ship to safety. Commander Steve Phillips turned to crystal along with his boarding party when they attempted to stop a crystalline raid. Lieutenant Nancy Brooks died when Zephyrian fighters mistook her medical transport for a military vessel and blasted it apart. The aliens in the council chamber did not seem to care about these deaths. They spoke in their strange languages and made their weird gestures while humans bled and died for their politics. Counselor Vexstar of the Hegemony was the worst of them all. He was a tall, thin creature with purple skin and too many arms, and he talked about humans like they were insects. The breaking point came when Vexstar stood up to address the council about the latest casualty reports. He looked at the numbers on his datapad and waved one of his 4 hands dismissively. His translator device made his words sound cold and mechanical. "Human losses are within acceptable limits," he said. "Their species reproduces quickly and has many replacement units available. We should send additional human forces to strengthen the peacekeeping mission." The chamber fell silent. Even the other aliens seemed uncomfortable with how casually Vexstar had dismissed human deaths. Jake felt something snap inside his mind. He had heard these creatures talk about humans as tools and weapons for 3 decades, but calling dead soldiers acceptable losses and living people replacement units was too much to bear. Jake stood up slowly from the human delegation section. Every eye in the chamber turned to look at him. His hands shook with rage, but his voice came out steady and clear. "No," he said. The single word echoed through the massive hall like a gunshot. Vexstar's purple skin darkened with annoyance. "The human delegate will explain his objection to the council's decision," he said in his mechanical voice. Jake walked down to the speaking platform in the center of the chamber. He looked up at the hundreds of alien faces staring down at him from their floating seats. Some looked curious, others seemed angry, but most just looked bored. They expected him to make some minor complaint and then agree to send more humans to die. "For 30 years, humanity has served this council," Jake began. "We have fought your wars, solved your problems, and died for your causes. We have been your police force, your army, your construction workers, and your janitors. We have done every job that you were too proud, too scared, or too lazy to do yourselves." The aliens began to shift in their seats. This was not the usual diplomatic speech they expected from human representatives. Jake continued, his voice growing stronger. "We have mined your poisonous asteroids and lost thousands to radiation sickness. We have mediated your territorial disputes and watched our diplomats get murdered by extremists. We have served as cannon fodder in your proxy wars and seen entire generations of our young people die for causes they never understood." Counselor Zethruck of the Commerce Guild leaned forward in his floating chair. "The human delegate speaks out of turn," he said. "These are matters of galactic security that require—" "Shut up," Jake said. The simple words hit the chamber like a physical blow. No one had ever told a council member to shut up in the entire history of the organization. Jake looked directly at Vexstar. You call our dead soldiers acceptable losses. You call our living people replacement units. You think we are disposable because we breed quickly and die easily. You are wrong. He turned to address the entire chamber. As of this moment, the Human Federation formally withdraws from the Galactic Council. We are done being your slaves, your soldiers, and your scapegoats. Find someone else to do your dirty work. The chamber erupted in chaos. Aliens jumped from their floating chairs and shouted in dozens of different languages. Some demanded explanations, others made threats, and a few actually seemed to be begging. Jake ignored them all. He gathered up his datapads and official documents, turned his back on the council that had used humanity for 3 decades, and walked toward the exit. Vexstar's mechanical voice rose above the noise. You cannot simply leave the council. There are procedures, treaties, and obligations that must be... Jake stopped at the chamber doors and looked back one final time. Watch us, he said, and walked out into the corridor where his security team was waiting. Within an hour, Jake was on a fast courier ship heading back to human space. His first message went directly to Admiral Carter with orders to begin immediate withdrawal of all human forces from Council operations. His second message went to the Human Federation government with a complete report of what had happened and a recommendation that they prepare for war. The aliens had treated humans like disposable tools for 30 years. Now they were about to learn what happened when the tools decided to walk away. Captain Ben Rodriguez stood on the command deck of the mining station orbiting KEPLER 442b and watched his crew work with desperate efficiency. They had been given 72 hours to strip the station of everything valuable before the aliens arrived to claim what they thought was rightfully theirs. Ben had no intention of leaving behind so much as a spare bolt for the creatures, who had treated his people like disposable workers for 3 decades. The mining station was one of hundreds that humans had built and operated throughout Council space. It extracted rare minerals from the asteroid belt around a dying star, minerals that were essential for the advanced technology that kept alien civilizations running. The work was dangerous and deadly, with radiation levels that would kill most alien species in minutes. Humans had volunteered for the job because someone had to do it, and the Council had been happy to let them risk their lives for the greater good. Now, Ben's engineers were pulling apart every piece of human technology they could move. The quantum extractors that made the mining operation possible were built with human ingenuity and maintained with human blood. Chief Engineer Katie Mills worked alongside her team to disconnect the massive machines and load them onto cargo ships bound for human space. The aliens had never bothered to learn how the extractors worked, assuming that humans would always be available to operate them. Dr. Helen Martinez supervised the medical evacuation from Research Station Omega near the Galactic Core. Her teams had spent 15 years developing cures for alien diseases that had plagued the galaxy for centuries. The Verdanian plague that had killed millions was now just a minor illness thanks to human research. The Centauri flu that once wiped out entire colonies was treatable with a simple injection that human doctors had invented. Helen watched her medical staff pack up their laboratories and research data with careful precision. Every vaccine formula, every treatment protocol, and every piece of medical knowledge that humans had developed was going home with them. The aliens had funded the research, but human minds had done the actual work of saving alien lives. The Verdanian health minister arrived at the station just as Helen was preparing to leave. Minister Qualvin was a short, round creature with blue skin and worried eyes. He spoke through a translator device that made his voice sound tinny and strange. Dr. Martinez, please reconsider this action, he said. My people depend on your medical expertise. Without human doctors and human research, we will face health crises that could destroy our civilization. Helen looked at the alien official with tired eyes. She had worked 18-hour days for 15 years to keep his people healthy, and they had never once thanked her for it. You should have thought about that before you let the council treat us like expendable labor, she said. Qualvaness blew. Skin turned pale. But the medical stations, the research facilities, the vaccine production centers, they cannot function without human oversight. Surely there must be some arrangement we can make. Find someone else to run them, Helen said, echoing the words that Jake Morrison had used in the council chamber. She walked past the alien minister and boarded the last medical transport leaving the station. Captain Roy Thompson commanded a convoy of freight ships that handled cargo transport between the Outer Rim territories and the Galactic Core. Human logistics networks had become the backbone of interstellar commerce over the past 3 decades. Aliens were good at making things and growing things, but they were terrible at moving things efficiently from one place to another. Roy's convoy handled 60% of all cargo shipping in the sector. His ships carried everything from food supplies to industrial equipment to luxury goods. The routes he had established and the systems he had developed kept trade flowing smoothly between dozens of different worlds and species. Now, Roy was pulling his ships out of those trade routes and heading back to human space. Behind him, the carefully balanced supply chains that had fed and supplied alien civilizations for decades began to collapse. Cargo that had moved predictably and efficiently under human management was suddenly stranded at spaceports with no one qualified to transport it. The economic impact was immediate and devastating. Worlds that depended on imported food began to face shortages within days. Manufacturing centers that relied on steady supplies of raw materials found their production lines shutting down. Even basic consumer goods became scarce as the distribution networks that humans had built and maintained simply stopped functioning. Commander Susan Blake had been responsible for peacekeeping operations in 12 different sectors of Council space. Her security forces had maintained order in regions where ancient tribal hatreds ran deeper than galactic history. Humans had a talent for understanding the complex politics and cultural conflicts that drove alien violence, and they had developed techniques for preventing wars before they started. Susan's withdrawal left power vacuums that immediately filled with violence. The Altarian trade dispute that her diplomats had kept under control for 5 years exploded into open warfare within hours of her departure. The Nexus border conflict that human peacekeepers had frozen in place suddenly resumed with a fury that shocked even the combatants. Species that had coexisted peacefully under human mediation began settling old scores with blood and fire. Ancient grudges that had been suppressed by human diplomacy erupted across the galaxy like infected wounds. The careful balance that human peacekeepers had maintained simply vanished when they packed up their equipment and went home. General Chris Adams established a reception center at the edge of human space to handle the flood of refugees fleeing Council territory. Not all of the refugees were human. Some aliens had worked closely with human teams and feared retaliation from their own governments. Others simply recognized that human space was likely to be safer and more stable than the chaos that was spreading. Through Council territory, the alien ambassadors arrived at Chris's border station within a week of the withdrawal announcement. They came with offers of increased representation in the Council, better compensation for human services, and formal apologies for past mistakes. Some even suggested that humans could become full voting members of the Council instead of just service providers. Chris met them in the station's main conference room. The aliens sat around the table in their environmental suits and spoke through their translator devices about the urgent need to restore human participation in Council operations. They painted pictures of galactic civilization collapsing without human support and warned of wars that could destroy entire species. The Council recognizes that mistakes were made in the past, said Ambassador Yextel of the Diplomatic Corps. We are prepared to offer significant concessions to restore the human partnership. Chris listened to their proposals with a patient expression. When they finished speaking, he stood up and walked to the conference room's main view screen. He activated the display and showed them real-time feeds from across Council space. Mining operations failing without human expertise, medical crises spreading without human doctors, trade routes collapsing without human logistics. War is erupting. Without human peacekeepers. You had 30 years to offer us respect and partnership, Chris said. You chose to treat us as disposable tools instead. Now you want to negotiate because you realize you cannot function without us. The aliens began to speak over each other, offering territorial concessions, technology transfers, and economic partnerships. They promised to reform the council, to give humans equal representation, to ensure that human lives would never again be treated as expendable. Chris turned off the view screen and looked at the alien delegation. We are not interested in your offers, he said. Find someone else to do your work. The aliens left the border station empty-handed, and Chris sent a message to the Human Federation government confirming that the withdrawal was proceeding according to plan. Across human space, the exodus continued as every human asset, every piece of human technology, and every human person came home from 3 decades of thankless service to an ungrateful galaxy. President Amanda Foster sat in her office on Earth and watched the reports stream in from across the galaxy. 6 months had passed since Jake Morrison had walked out of the council chamber, and the predictions were coming true faster than anyone had expected. The careful order that humanity had maintained for 3 decades was collapsing like a house of cards in a hurricane. The Zephyrian Crystalline war that had killed so many human peacekeepers was now spreading across 5 star systems. Without human mediators to enforce ceasefires and negotiate truces, both sides had abandoned any pretense of limited warfare. Zephyrian battle fleets were using planet-killer weapons on civilian targets, while crystalline forces were turning entire populations into living statues with their matter conversion technology. Amanda read the casualty reports with grim satisfaction. These were not human casualties, they were alien deaths caused by alien stupidity and alien hatred. The species that had dismissed human lives as acceptable losses were now learning what real losses looked like when no one was willing to step between them and their ancient enemies. The mining operations that humans had managed were failing across the galaxy. The quantum extractors that Captain Ben Rodriguez had removed from Kepler 442b were now sitting safely in human warehouses, while the aliens who had claimed ownership of the mining stations struggled to operate equipment they had never bothered to understand. Director Carl Jackson monitored the industrial reports from his position at Human Intelligence Command. The rare mineral extraction that had powered alien technology for decades had dropped to 30% of previous levels. Equipment failures were multiplying as alien engineers tried to maintain machinery they had never learned to operate properly. The hegemony's primary industrial world had lost 3 major mining platforms in the past month alone. Without human technicians to perform regular maintenance, the complex systems that kept the platforms operational in the hostile environment of a radiation-soaked asteroid field were breaking down one by one. Each failure cost the aliens millions of credits and set back their industrial production by months. Commander Lisa Warren watched the agricultural disaster unfold from her new position as Director of Human Food Security. The farming colonies that her teams had established and maintained throughout Council space were failing as alien farmers tried to work in environments they did not understand. Lisa's agricultural specialists had spent years developing techniques for growing food on worlds with hostile climates, thin atmospheres, and alien soil chemistry. They had fed billions of aliens across dozens of marginal worlds, turning barren rocks into productive farmland through human ingenuity and determination. Now, those same worlds were facing famine as the replacement farming teams struggled with crop failures and environmental disasters. The Altarian breadbasket colonies that had fed half the sector were producing barely enough food to sustain their own populations. The hydroponic facilities on the water-scarce worlds of the Rim were shutting down as alien technicians failed to maintain the delicate chemical balance that made them productive. Dr. Jack Phillips received hundreds of desperate communications from alien medical facilities every day. His new office as Director of Human Medical Services was flooded with requests for consultation, emergency assistance, and technology transfers. The messages offered astronomical payments for human expertise, but Jack deleted them all without reading past the first paragraph. The medical crises spreading across council space were becoming more severe every week. The Verdanian plague that human doctors had controlled for 15 years was resurging in new and deadlier forms. Without human research teams to track mutations and develop updated treatments, the aliens were fighting the disease with obsolete medicine and desperate hope. The Centauri flu had mutated beyond the reach of existing vaccines and was spreading through populations that had no natural immunity. Alien medical teams that had relied on human expertise for decades were helpless to stop the advance of diseases they had never learned to treat independently. Captain Sarah Williams led the first wave of human colonization into the frontier sectors, beyond council space. These were regions that the aliens had declared too dangerous or too remote to be worth exploring, but humans had always been willing to go places that other species feared. Sarah's colony ships found rich worlds with abundant resources and no alien claims or territorial disputes. Human settlers who had spent decades working dangerous jobs for alien employers were now building new cities and new farms for themselves and their children. The frontier was becoming a human domain, free from alien politics and alien exploitation. The military situation in council space was deteriorating rapidly. Without human tactical expertise and frontline forces, the aliens were discovering that their advanced technology was no substitute for human courage and adaptability. Colonel Pete Johnson monitored the intelligence reports from his position at Strategic Assessment Command. The Nexus rebellion that had been suppressed for decades by human peacekeepers was now spreading across the core worlds like wildfire. Revolutionary movements that had been contained by human diplomacy and human security forces were suddenly finding opportunities to strike at their oppressors. The Council's military doctrine had become dependent on human forces to do the actual fighting, while alien commanders stayed safely behind the lines and made strategic decisions. Without humans to serve as their army, the aliens were learning that they had forgotten how to fight their own battles. The economic collapse was accelerating beyond anyone's predictions. Trade volume throughout council space had dropped by 70% as the logistics networks that humans had built and maintained simply stopped functioning. Entire sectors were becoming isolated as cargo routes that had operated smoothly for decades became too dangerous or too expensive to maintain. The Galactic Commerce Guild reported industrial production failures across multiple worlds as supply chains that had depended on human management fell apart. Raw materials sat unused at mining facilities while manufacturing centers shut down for lack of components. Finished goods rotted in warehouses while alien logistics coordinators struggled to understand the complex transportation systems that humans had operated efficiently for decades. The psychological impact on alien societies was becoming visible in ways that surprised even human analysts. Species that had considered themselves superior to humanity were facing the reality that they had become completely dependent on the people they had dismissed as inferior. Ambassador Tony Garcia established a monitoring station at the edge of human space to track communications from council territory. The messages he intercepted revealed a level of panic and desperation that the aliens had never shown publicly. Private communications between alien leaders spoke of civilizational collapse, resource wars, and the possibility that their technological society might not survive without human support. The most telling development was the complete failure of the Council's exploration program. Human survey teams had been responsible for discovering and cataloging 70% of all new systems and resources over the past 3 decades. They had ventured into dangerous regions of space that alien explorers had avoided, mapping new trade routes and finding new worlds suitable for colonization. Now, the alien exploration fleets sat idle in their home ports because no one was willing to take the risks that humans had accepted as routine. The galaxy was full of unexplored regions and undiscovered resources, but the aliens lacked the courage and determination to go looking for them. The breaking point came when the hegemony's primary terraforming world suffered a complete ecological collapse. The environmental control systems that humans had installed and maintained for 15 years failed catastrophically. When alien technicians attempted to modify them without understanding how they worked, within days, a thriving world with a population of 50 million became a toxic wasteland where nothing could survive. The terraforming technology that had taken decades to develop and implement was destroyed in a matter of hours by alien incompetence and arrogance. Amanda Foster read the final report and felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. The aliens were finally learning the true cost of their dismissive attitude toward human lives and human contributions. They had treated humanity as a disposable resource for 30 years, and now they were discovering what life was like without that resource. The galaxy was burning, and humanity was no longer willing to put out the fires. Counselor Zethruck of the Commerce Guild stood before the emergency session of the Galactic Council and delivered the most devastating economic report in the organization's 500-year history. His normally steady voice shook as he read the numbers that spelled doom for their civilization. Trade volume has collapsed by 70% across all sectors, he announced to the shocked assembly. Industrial production has fallen to levels not seen since the pre-spaceflight era. 17 member worlds are facing critical resource shortages, and 43 colonies have declared states of emergency due to supply chain failures. The alien delegates sat in stunned silence as Zethruck continued his litany of disasters. The carefully constructed economic system that had sustained their civilization for centuries was falling apart faster than anyone had thought possible. Every sector that humans had touched was now failing, and there seemed to be no way to stop the collapse. Counselor Vextar, the same alien who had dismissed human lives as acceptable losses, now looked like a broken creature. His purple skin had turned pale gray, and his forearms trembled as he spoke. "How long can our civilization survive at these production levels?" he asked. Zethruck consulted his datapad with shaking hands. "At current rates of decline, most outer rim territories will become uninhabitable within 2 years. Core world populations may be sustainable for 5 years, assuming no further deterioration in essential services." Ambassador Tony Garcia sat in his monitoring station at the edge of human space and watched the alien communications traffic with growing amazement. The same species that had once treated humans with casual contempt were now begging for help. With the desperation of drowning swimmers reaching for a life preserver, the messages came from every level of alien society. Government officials offered territorial concessions that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. Corporate leaders promised technology transfers and exclusive trade agreements. Even alien religious leaders sent spiritual appeals for human mercy and compassion. One message from the Verdanian Prime Minister particularly caught Tony's attention. The alien leader who had once described humans as useful servants was now offering to make humanity equal partners in governing Verdanian space. He promised to rename major cities after human heroes and to establish monuments honoring human sacrifices. Tony deleted the message without responding, just as he had deleted hundreds of others. The time for negotiations had passed when Vextar had called human lives acceptable losses. Dr. Nancy Scott reviewed the medical crisis reports from her new position as Director of Human Health Independence. The diseases that her teams had controlled for decades were now spreading through alien populations like wildfire, mutating into new forms that their obsolete treatments could not handle. The Verdanian plague had evolved into 3 distinct strains, each more deadly than the original. Alien medical teams were using treatment protocols that were 5 years out of date, having never bothered to keep up with the research that human doctors had continued in their spare time. Entire worlds were being quarantined as the death toll mounted into the millions. The Centauri flu was proving even more devastating. The virus had jumped species barriers and was now affecting alien populations that had never been exposed to it before. Without human virologists to track its evolution and develop new vaccines, the aliens were fighting a losing battle against a disease that was adapting faster than their ability to respond. Nancy received daily reports of alien medical facilities offering their entire annual budgets for a single human consultation. Some desperate alien doctors were offering to become permanent servants to human medical teams in exchange for access to current treatment protocols. She filed all the reports without reading them completely. Colonel Pete Johnson monitored the security situation across Council space from his position at Human Strategic Intelligence. The collapse of civil order that had begun with the withdrawal of human peacekeepers was accelerating beyond all predictions. The Nexus Rebellion had spread to 47 worlds and was gaining strength every day. Revolutionary forces that had been contained for decades by human diplomacy and security measures were now overwhelming alien military units that had forgotten how to fight without human support. The hegemony's core worlds were facing their first internal conflicts in over a century as subject populations rose up against their oppressors. Without human forces to maintain order, the alien government was discovering that their advanced technology was useless against determined rebels who had nothing left to lose. Even worse, several member species of the Council were beginning to fight each other over the scraps of their collapsing civilization. The Altarian trade dispute had escalated into a full-scale war that was consuming resources neither side could afford to lose. The Crystalline Collective was using their matter conversion weapons against civilian targets, while the Zephyrian Empire responded with planet-killer bombardments that left entire worlds uninhabitable. Captain Sarah Williams established the first permanent human settlement in the frontier sectors and named it New Houston. Her colonists were building a thriving community on a world that the aliens had declared too hostile for habitation, using the same determination and ingenuity that had made humans valuable to the Council. The contrast between human progress and alien decline was becoming starker every day. While Council space burned in chaos and conflict, human space was experiencing unprecedented growth and prosperity. Resources that had once been spent supporting alien civilization were now flowing into human research, infrastructure, and expansion. The most dramatic example of alien desperation came when a delegation of high-ranking officials from 12 different species arrived at the human border demanding an audience with human leadership. They came in the most advanced diplomatic vessel in the galaxy, surrounded by escort ships that represented the combined military might of the remaining Council forces. General Chris Adams met them at the border station with a single human patrol ship. The contrast was intentional and pointed. The aliens needed massive displays of power to feel secure, while humans were confident enough to send one ship to meet their entire fleet. The alien delegation included species that had never spoken directly to humans before, considering such contact beneath their dignity. Now, they were literally begging for an opportunity to negotiate with the people they had once dismissed as inferior servants. The Council is prepared to offer humanity full membership with voting rights equal to the founding species, announced Ambassador Prime Yeltaran of the Central Authority. We recognize that past policies were inadequate and are willing to make substantial concessions to restore human participation. Chris listened to their proposals with the same patient expression he had shown to previous delegations. They offered humanity control of entire sectors, exclusive rights to all mining operations, and guaranteed representation in the Council's highest governing bodies. Some aliens even suggested that humans should be given veto power over all Council decisions. When they finished speaking, Chris activated a holographic display showing the current state of Council space. Burning worlds, failed colonies, collapsing trade routes, and spreading wars filled the three-dimensional map like a plague of destruction. "You want us to help you save this," Chris said, gesturing at the display. "You want us to come back and fix the problems you created when you drove us away?" The aliens began speaking over each other again, offering even more desperate concessions. They promised to pay reparations for past wrongs, to build monuments honoring human sacrifices, and to accept human oversight of all Council operations. Chris turned off the display and looked at the alien delegation with cold eyes. "You had 30 years to treat us as equals," he said. "You chose to treat us as disposable tools instead. Now your civilization is collapsing and you want us to save you from the consequences of your own actions." Ambassador Prime Yeltarana's translator crackled with desperate emotion. "Please, you must understand, millions of innocent beings will die if this continues. Surely, human compassion, where was your compassion when human soldiers died in your wars? Chris interrupted. Where was your concern for innocent beings when you called our casualties acceptable losses? The alien delegation left the border station in defeat, and Chris sent another message to the Human Federation confirming that no negotiations were being considered. The aliens had made their choice 30 years ago when they decided that human lives were expendable. Now they would live with the consequences of that choice. Assuming their civilization survived long enough for them to learn from their mistakes across the galaxy, the message was becoming clear: humanity was no longer interested in serving as the galaxy's cleanup crew. The species that had dismissed human worth were now discovering just how valuable that worth had been, but the lesson was coming too late to save them from their own arrogance and stupidity. 2 years had passed since Jake Morrison walked out of the council chamber, and the galaxy had permanently changed. Ambassador Jake now stood in the conference room of the Independent Systems Alliance, a loose confederation of species that had grown tired of council politics and alien arrogance. Unlike the hierarchical structure of the old council, the alliance operated on principles that humans had suggested: mutual respect, voluntary cooperation, and earned trust. The alliance included 12 species that had broken away from the failing council, plus 3 newly contacted civilizations that humans had discovered in the frontier sectors. Each member contributed according to their abilities and received benefits based on their participation. No one was considered expendable, and no one was expected to sacrifice their people for someone else's political agenda. Jake looked around the conference table at beings who treated him as an equal partner rather than a useful servant. The Corellian representative was a crystalline entity that communicated through harmonic vibrations. The Nexari delegate was a small, furry creature with 6 arms and intelligent eyes. The Vashti ambassador resembled a walking tree with silver bark and leaves that changed color with her emotions. The council delegation is requesting another meeting, reported Captain Mike Chun, who served as the Alliance's military coordinator. They claim to have new proposals that address all of our previous concerns. Jake almost smiled at the irony. The same council that had once issued orders and expected blind obedience was now begging for meetings and making increasingly desperate offers. What is our response? Asked the Corellian representative, her harmonic voice translated into words by the Alliance's universal communication system. The same as always, Jake replied. We are not interested in rejoining an organization that treated sentient beings as disposable resources. The Council made their choice 30 years ago, and they must live with the consequences. The former Council space had fractured into 3 distinct regions, each struggling with the aftermath of humanity's departure. The core territories maintained some semblance of order through authoritarian control and strict resource rationing. The alien governments there had abandoned any pretense of democracy or individual rights in favor of emergency powers that allowed them to direct every aspect of their citizens' lives. The Rim territories had descended into constant warfare as local powers fought over the resources that humans had once distributed fairly. Without human peacekeepers to maintain stability, ancient tribal conflicts had erupted with a violence that shocked even the participants. Entire sectors were becoming uninhabitable. As the fighting spread and escalated beyond any hope of control, the border zones had become lawless frontiers where survival depended on strength, cunning, and the willingness to do whatever was necessary to protect your own people. Pirates and raiders operated freely in regions where human security forces had once maintained order. Trade was conducted at gunpoint, and diplomacy was a luxury that few could afford. Admiral Lisa Carter commanded the Human Defense Fleet from her flagship, the Earth's Pride. Her ships no longer served as expendable peacekeepers in alien conflicts, but as protectors of human interests and the interests of those who had earned human respect through their actions rather than their words. Lisa's fleets patrolled human space with pride and purpose. They escorted human merchant vessels through dangerous regions, protected human colonies from pirate raids, and defended Alliance members who had proven themselves worthy of human protection. The quality and effectiveness of her forces had improved dramatically since they were no longer being wasted on hopeless alien conflicts. The psychological impact of humanity's success was, perhaps, the most significant change in the galactic balance of power. Species throughout the galaxy were beginning to understand that respect could not be demanded or purchased, it had to be earned through actions and demonstrated through consistent behavior over time. Captain Ben Rodriguez had established a network of human trade posts in neutral space, offering limited services to alien species who were willing to pay fair prices and treat human personnel with dignity. These outposts had become beacons of stability and prosperity. In regions still struggling with the Council's collapse, Ben's trade posts operated on simple principles that the aliens found revolutionary: equal treatment for all customers, fair prices for quality services, and respect for the people who provided those services. The contrast with the old Council system, where humans had been expected to provide services for free while being treated as inferior beings, was stark and deliberate. Alien merchants who visited the trade posts quickly learned that humans were no longer willing to accept second-class treatment. Those who adapted to the new reality found that human services were more efficient and reliable than anything available in Council space. Those who maintained their old attitudes of superiority found themselves banned from the posts and forced to seek alternatives in the chaotic remains of their own territory. Dr. Helen Martinez made a breakthrough in faster-than-light medical response systems from her laboratory on New Geneva, the medical research center that had been established in the frontier sectors. Her team had developed technology that could deliver emergency medical treatment across interstellar distances, potentially saving millions of lives throughout the galaxy. As Helen reviewed the specifications for the new system, she considered the implications of her discovery. The same alien species that had once taken human medical expertise for granted were now dying from diseases that this technology could easily treat. The irony was not lost on her that human innovation continued to advance while alien medical science stagnated without human support. Helen had received hundreds of requests from alien governments begging for access to human medical technology. They offered vast sums of money, territorial concessions, and political agreements in exchange for treatments that could save their dying populations. Every request went unanswered, filed away with the thousands of other pleas that had arrived. Since the withdrawal began, the success of human independence was becoming impossible to ignore. While Council space struggled with economic collapse, civil wars, and technological stagnation, human territory flourished with innovation, growth, and prosperity. The contrast was visible in every aspect of life. Human colonies thrived while alien worlds failed. Human technology advanced while alien science declined. And human society grew stronger while alien civilization crumbled. Commander Lisa Warren supervised the agricultural projects that were transforming marginal worlds throughout Alliance space into productive farming centers. Using techniques that had been developed during humanity's service to the Council, her teams were creating food security for species that had proven themselves worthy of human assistance. The abundance of food in Alliance territory contrasted sharply with the famine spreading through Council space. Worlds that had once depended on human agricultural expertise were facing starvation as their replacement farming systems failed. The aliens who had once taken human food production for granted were now discovering that growing food was more complex than they had realized. The political transformation was equally dramatic. The Alliance operated as a genuine partnership where decisions were made through consensus and cooperation rather than through dominance and submission. Species that had been oppressed under the Council's hierarchical system found themselves with real voices in Alliance governance. The Nexari delegate often spoke about the difference between Council membership and Alliance participation. Under the Council, we were subjects who obeyed orders, she explained during one Alliance session. In the Alliance, we are partners who contribute ideas. Humans taught us that respect is earned through actions, not demanded through power. Captain Sarah Williams expanded the human colonial program into regions that the Council had considered too dangerous or too remote to be worth exploring. Her colonists were building thriving communities on worlds that aliens had dismissed as uninhabitable. using the same determination and innovation that had made humans valuable to the galaxy. The new Houston colony had grown from a frontier outpost to a major population center in just 2 years. The settlers there enjoyed a standard of living that exceeded anything available in council space, with advanced technology, abundant resources, and the freedom to build their own future without alien interference. As the second anniversary of humanity's withdrawal approached, Jake Morrison prepared his final report to the Human Federation government. The experiment in independence had succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. Humanity had not only survived without the Council, but had thrived in ways that would have been impossible under alien domination. The aliens who had once dismissed human lives as acceptable losses now understood the true cost of their arrogance. They had learned that some things were more valuable than political acceptance, and that sometimes the best way to gain respect was to stop seeking it from those who were not worthy to give it. Jake concluded his report with a simple observation that captured the essence of humanity's transformation. We spent 30 years trying to earn their respect through service and sacrifice. We finally earned it by walking away and showing them what they had lost. The galaxy has learned,